The mountains of Eldrath were wrapped in a thick mist that clung to the jagged cliffs like a living shroud. From the highest peaks to the deep valleys below, the kingdom hummed with whispers of the royal wedding. Kyle, the Alpha King, was a figure of legend, fierce, commanding, and feared by friend and foe alike. Yet behind the mask of strength, a darkness lingered in his eyes, one no one had dared to touch. On this day, Kale stood at the edge of his throne room, clad in ceremonial silver armor that reflected the pale light of the moon filtering through tall stained glass windows. His Omega bride, Lyra, walked toward him with quiet grace. She was unlike anyone Kale had ever seen, strong, calm, and yet alive with a warmth that drew people near. Her hair fell in waves of gold over her shoulders, and her eyes held a light that made the shadows in the throne room seem less oppressive. The court watched in awe. Nobles whispered, some with excitement, some with envy, but all waited for the ceremony to conclude. The Alpha King's reputation was unmatched, and marrying an Omega of Lyra's strength and beauty was said to solidify his legacy. When the vows were exchanged, there was a hush, a silence that carried more weight than any words. Lyra's voice was steady as she pledged herself to Kyle, and Kale's words were deliberate, yet careful, as if measured not only for the court, but for himself. Then, as the ceremony ended, Kale spoke a sentence that caused a stir among those present. "I will see nothing from this day forward," he said, his voice low, resonant, almost musical in its control. "I am blind to all but the truth of our bond." Gasps echoed across the hall. Some nobles shifted uneasily, murmuring about the unusual declaration. Blindness was no small matter for an Alpha King. His power, his strength, his very control over the pack and the land depended on sight. Yet Kale stood unmoving, the cold precision in his stance daring anyone to challenge him. Lyra's heart skipped. She had sensed Kale's inner shadows, but she had not expected this. She approached him, gently resting her hand on his forearm. "Kale, are you truly blind?" she asked, her voice calm yet firm. Kale did not answer immediately. Instead, he allowed her touch to linger, watching her closely, though no one could see his eyes. The silence between them was heavy, almost sacred. Lyra sensed his awareness, his calculation. Yet he gave no sign of fear or anger. "I will see only what I must," Kale finally said. "This world is full of deceit, and the eyes are weak. My blindness is my shield." The court was shocked, but Lyra did not recoil. She had come into Kale's world with courage, not fear. Her heart understood what others could not, that Kale's declaration was more than a physical state. It was a test. As night fell and the wedding celebrations moved into the great hall, the pack gathered, forming a circle around the newlyweds. Wolves of every size and color shifted in the shadows, their eyes gleaming like molten gold. They were loyal to Kale, yet wary of change. Whispers of the Omega's strength floated through the air like smoke. Lyra understood their language not in words but in feeling, in the rhythm of their movements, in the quiet power that flowed from their alpha. Lyra's first night beside Kale was quiet. The chambers were vast, adorned with tapestries depicting battles and victories long past. Candles flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Kale moved with careful precision, sensing her presence, yet never touching her without reason. She noticed how he felt the contours of objects, how he seemed to see through his other senses. Every step, every gesture was deliberate, controlled. Lyra, however, was not intimidated. She tested him quietly, placing objects near his path, watching for any sign that he could not see. Each time, Kale responded perfectly, yet with a subtle grace that suggested he knew the challenge was hers to give. The dance between them was delicate, silent, filled with tension. Days passed. Lyra began learning the patterns of the castle, moving through corridors, reading the signs left by Kale and the pack. She felt the eyes of the Alpha on her constantly, even when she knew he was blind. There was a subtle power struggle beneath the surface, one of trust, courage, and understanding. She wanted to know him, to reach the heart hidden behind his silence. Kale, meanwhile, found himself both unsettled and intrigued. The Omega who dared challenge him without fear, who touched him without hesitation, and who observed him without flinching, was unlike any he had met. His heart, long guarded by walls as high and unyielding as the Eldrath cliffs, began to stir. He noticed her courage, her insight, her warmth, and though he would never admit it, he felt a longing he had buried long ago. The pack, too, sensed the shift. Wolves who had followed Kale unquestioningly began to show signs of loyalty toward Lyra. She commanded respect without authority, her presence alone inspiring the pack to rally in ways Kale had not expected. And Kale, proud and wary, watched as the Omega began to become more than his bride. She became a force he could not ignore. One evening, as the moon rose high and the castle was quiet, Lyra wandered into the courtyard. The mist rolled in thick waves, curling around her feet. Kyle followed silently, feeling her every movement. She reached the edge of a cliff that overlooked the valley, where the silver rivers twisted like ribbons below. "Do you see it?" Lyra whispered. "The world is alive, Kyle. Even in shadow, even in mist." Kyle said nothing. He felt the wind on his face, heard the rustle of trees, sensed the heartbeat of the land. And yet, for the first time, he allowed himself to acknowledge the truth. He was seeing through more than eyes. Lyra turned to him, sensing the tension coiling around his chest. She reached for his hand. "I feel you, Kale. You do not need to hide from me." He hesitated. The walls he had built, the mask he had worn, began to tremble. Part of him wanted to pull away, to remain untouchable, untamed by anyone, even her. But another part, the part buried deep beneath scars and shadows, longed for her trust, her courage, her light. As their hands brushed, a movement in the mist caught Lyra's attention. Shadows shifted unnaturally, almost as if the castle itself was alive. She felt a chill, a warning that whispered through the wind. Her gaze sharpened, and Kale stiffened beside her, sensing the same disturbance, though outwardly he remained composed. "What is that?" Lyra asked, her voice trembling slightly. Kale's silence answered her better than words ever could. Something ancient, hidden and dangerous stirred within the walls of Eldrath, and Lyra, in her courage, had drawn it closer. The night deepened. The mist thickened. Kale and Lyra stood together at the edge of the cliff, the kingdom stretching out below them like a sleeping beast. And in that moment, Lyra felt the truth that would bind their fates together. Kale may appear blind, but he was watching, and she had begun to see into the darkness of his heart. Cliffhanger. A faint glow emerged from the shadows of the castle's northern wing. Lyra stepped forward instinctively, sensing a force that had been waiting for her. And Kale, feeling the stir of something ancient and powerful, knew that the first challenge of their union had just begun. The glow in the northern wing of Eldrath Castle had been faint, but it lingered in Lyra's mind like a call she could not ignore. She moved toward it cautiously, her footsteps silent against the cold stone floors. The castle, which had seemed familiar in daylight, now loomed like a living entity, shadows curling along walls, whispers of ancient secrets drifting from corners she had never noticed before. Kyle followed her closely. Though he had claimed blindness, his senses were sharper than any human's. He felt the faint tremor in the stone beneath their feet, the subtle shift of air currents as something stirred ahead, and the almost imperceptible pulse of magic that had lain dormant for decades. His mask of calm remained, but inside, a flicker of unease and curiosity took root. Lyra reached the source of the glow, a small chamber tucked behind an archway of black stone. The light pulsed softly from a crystalline orb, suspended in mid-air. Runic symbols glimmered on the walls, carved centuries ago in a language long forgotten. Lyra instinctively reached out, her fingers brushing the orb. A warmth spread through her hand, up her arm, and into her chest. The sensation was not painful, but it was powerful, as if the orb were awakening something deep within her. Cale's senses screamed a warning. "Do not touch it," he said, his voice low and controlled. "That is not a toy. That is a key." Lyra looked at him, her eyes steady. "A key to what, Cale? Secrets? Power? Or something you have been hiding?" Cale's jaw tightened. The truth was complicated. The orb was tied to an ancient curse, a curse that had threatened the Eldrath line for generations. Only an Omega with a bloodline as strong as hers could awaken its power without being consumed. He had pretended blindness to shield her from danger until he could understand her strength. But now, standing so close to the chamber, he realized she had already proven herself capable of seeing beyond his tests. The orb pulsed brighter, reacting to Lyra's presence. Symbols on the walls shifted, forming shapes that were vaguely familiar. Wolves, crowns, and chains intertwined. Kyle reached for her hand, but she pulled back, sensing that this moment was hers alone. She needed to face it, to understand it, to claim it. A soft hum filled the room, rising in pitch and intensity until it seemed to vibrate in the very bones of the castle. Lyra felt it in her chest, a rhythm that matched her heartbeat, and realized that it was calling to her, not just as an Omega, but as Kyle's mate. Her bond with him gave her courage, but also responsibility. The orb recognized her, acknowledged her power, and sought her guidance. Kyle remained silent, watching, feeling a mix of awe and fear. He knew that the awakening of the orb could change everything: the pack, the kingdom, even the balance of power in Eldrath. Yet as he saw the determination in Lyra's eyes, a deep respect took root in his heart. She was not just his bride. She was his equal, a force in her own right. Suddenly, the hum surged into a low roar, and the symbols flared with a blinding light. Lyra staggered but did not fall. Instead, she lifted her hands, letting the energy flow through her. The orb's glow expanded, filling the chamber with a warmth that felt like sunlight after a lifetime of shadow. Cale's senses were overwhelmed. He could feel the magic bending around him, yet he did not panic. Instead, he stepped closer, ready to protect her if necessary. The pack, alerted by the surge of power, gathered silently outside the chamber. Wolves of every size and age pressed against the doors, their eyes gleaming with curiosity and loyalty. They could sense the change, the awakening of an ancient force, and the presence of an Omega who could command it. Cale felt the tension in the pack tighten. Their loyalty was absolute, but their fear of the unknown was real. Lyra turned toward the orb, now floating steadily before her. She placed her palm over its surface, and in that instant, she felt every pulse of Eldrath, every shadow, every heartbeat of the wolves, every secret corridor and hidden trap. The castle itself seemed alive beneath her touch, and she realized that Cale had not lied. He was not blind in the way he had claimed. He had been guarding himself, shielding his eyes from betrayal. "You see?" Lyra whispered, her voice steady though trembling with awe. "The world is not hidden from you. It waits for someone brave enough to claim it." Cale's heart thudded in his chest. For the first time, he felt vulnerable before her. And yet that vulnerability did not frighten him. Instead, it drew him closer. He reached out, lightly brushing her shoulder, a gesture of both protection and admiration. Lyra did not pull back. Instead, she smiled faintly, acknowledging the unspoken bond forming between them, a connection of trust, courage, and shared power. The orb's glow began to fade, leaving behind a trail of warmth that lingered in the air like the last notes of a song. Lyra stepped back, her breathing steadying, and turned to Cale. "There is more," she said quietly. "The pack, they are not just followers. They are part of this magic. We must guide them, or this power could turn against us." Kyle nodded, his mind racing. He had underestimated her. Her courage, insight, and connection to the pack were beyond anything he had expected. And in that realization, he felt something new: hope. A spark that he had thought lost forever began to kindle within him. As they left the chamber, the corridors of Eldrath seemed different, more alive. Shadows shifted in response to their presence, and Cale felt the eyes of the pack on him, then on Lyra, acknowledging the shift in balance. She was no longer just his bride. She was the center of something far greater than either of them had imagined. That night, under the pale light of the moon, Cale and Lyra stood together on the balcony overlooking the valley. The rivers glimmered like silver threads, and the mountains loomed in quiet majesty. The pack howled in the distance, a chorus of loyalty and acknowledgement. Cale reached for Lyra's hand. "You are more than I expected," he said, his voice soft, almost vulnerable. "Stronger than any test I could have devised, braver than anyone I have ever known." Lyra squeezed his hand, her gaze steady. "And you are not blind, Cale. You never were. You only needed to see me." For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Cale's heart, long guarded and frozen in shadow, began to thaw. Yet even as he allowed himself to feel, a flicker of unease stirred in the distant corners of Eldrath. Something ancient had awakened with the orb, something that even Lyra's strength might not fully control. Before they could ponder it further, a distant roar echoed from the northern cliffs, shaking the ground beneath their feet. The wolves' ears pricked, their bodies tensing in unison. Cale and Lyra exchanged a glance, understanding the unspoken truth. The kingdom was no longer safe. The challenge that had begun in the shadows was only the beginning. Lyra's eyes narrowed. "Cale, whatever comes, we face it together. Not as Alpha and Omega, but as partners, as equals." Kyle nodded, feeling the weight of his crown and the warmth of her hand intertwining. For the first time in years, he felt the balance of power shift, not in his favor, but in theirs, together. And in that balance lay both hope and danger. The wind howled through the mountains, carrying whispers of an ancient threat long forgotten. Lyra felt it stir in the air, a presence that had watched their union and waited for this moment. Cale felt it too, a shadow moving beyond sight, a force that could challenge even the combined strength of Alpha, Omega, and Pack. Cliffhanger. As the moon disappeared behind a cloud, the northern glow flared once more, brighter and more insistent. Lyra instinctively stepped forward, sensing a power that called to her, and Cale, feeling the surge of magic ripple through the castle, knew that the first true test of their union, and of Eldrath itself, was about to begin. The northern glow pulsed across Eldrath Castle like a heartbeat, illuminating the mountains and valleys below with a strange, almost sacred light. Cale and Lyra stood at the highest balcony, the cold wind whipping around them. The pack had gathered silently behind them, ears perked, muscles tense, eyes gleaming with unspoken loyalty. Even in shadow, Eldrath seemed alive, as if the castle itself held its breath, waiting. Cale's hand rested lightly on Lyra's shoulder. He had never felt more exposed, more aware of the weight of his crown and the strength of his bride. He had hidden behind the mask of blindness to protect himself, to protect his kingdom, and to keep the past from bleeding into the present. But now, standing beside Lyra, he realized that the truth was stronger than any deception. "The orb," Lyra whispered, her eyes tracing the northern cliffs. "It is not just a test. It is a warning. Something stirs, something ancient, something that has waited for the wrong moment to awaken." Cale nodded. He had sensed it too. The energy emanating from the cliffs was not ordinary magic. It was the remnant of an old curse, tied to the first alpha of Eldrath, a power that had been sealed only by courage and sacrifice. He realized, with a mixture of awe and dread, that this was the moment the legends had warned of, the moment when the balance of the kingdom would be tested. The pack shifted behind them, a low murmur vibrating through the stones. Wolves of every color and size circled, their eyes fixed on the horizon. Kyle could feel their anticipation, their loyalty, their readiness to defend the kingdom and him, but also their uncertainty. Lyra's presence had already begun to shift the pack's dynamics. She was no longer just an Omega. She was a leader, a guide, a force that even Cale had come to respect deeply. "Stay close," Kyle said softly, his voice a rumble in the wind. "Whatever comes, we face it together." Lyra nodded. Her grip on his hand was firm. "Together," she echoed. The glow from the cliffs grew brighter, shaping into a figure that seemed both wolf and shadow, immense and terrifying. Its eyes burned like embers, and it moved with a fluidity that was unnatural yet mesmerizing. The legends spoke of this. The guardian of the curse, the test for any alpha who dared to unite with a strong Omega. Many had failed. Many had vanished into shadow. Lyra stepped forward, her chest lifted, her presence radiating a quiet but undeniable authority. The pack shifted behind her, responding to her strength. Kyle felt a surge of pride and relief. She had embraced her power fully, and now she was no longer just a bride, but a protector, a guide for the Alpha and his kingdom. The Shadow Guardian let out a low growl, the sound vibrating through the air like distant thunder. Cale stepped in front of Lyra instinctively, a gesture of protection, though he knew deep inside that she could face this force as an equal. "You are not the first," Lyra said, her voice calm but commanding, carrying over the roar of the wind. "And you are not the last. But know this. We do not bow to fear. We face what must be faced. Together." The shadow hesitated, as if recognizing the truth in her words. Then it lunged, moving faster than thought. Cale and Lyra reacted in perfect unison. Cale's strength, honed over years as Alpha, combined with Lyra's connection to the pack and the awakened orb's magic. Their movements were seamless, a dance of power, trust, and instinct. The pack surged forward, forming a protective circle around Cale and Lyra. Wolves leapt, clawed, and circled the shadow, their movements precise and synchronized. The Guardian met them with a force that could crush stone, but Cale and Lyra's combined presence held it at bay. In the heart of the struggle, Kyle finally let go of the mask he had worn for so long. His eyes, once hidden behind the veil of false blindness, opened fully. They blazed with determination, clarity, and the deep love he felt for Lyra. In that moment, he saw not just the shadow before him, but the truth of everything, the bond with his Omega, the loyalty of his pack, and the weight of his crown. Lyra reached for him, their hands clasping as the shadow faltered. "Cale now," she urged. "Together!" With a shared focus, they directed the combined strength of their bond, their power, and the pack's loyalty. The Guardian roared one final time, a sound that shook the cliffs and rattled the castle windows, before dissolving into mist. The northern glow dimmed. leaving only the pale light of the moon illuminating Eldrath. Silence fell over the castle. The pack circled the balcony, panting but calm. Kyle turned to Lyra, his chest rising and falling with relief and wonder. You are incredible," he whispered. "I thought I was testing you, but it seems I was learning from you." Lyra smiled, a soft, luminous expression that reached her eyes and touched his heart. "And I learned from you," she replied. "Strength is not in hiding from the world, but in facing it, even when fear stands in your way." Kale pulled her close, feeling the warmth of her body against his, the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel completely, without masks, without pretense. The walls of his heart, long built from betrayal and caution, began to crumble under the force of trust, courage, and love. The pack howled in unison, a chorus of acknowledgement and loyalty. Kyle felt a wave of gratitude and pride. The kingdom was safe, for now. The curse had not defeated them. The ancient power had recognized strength, courage, and unity, and had accepted them as rightful rulers of Eldrath. As the night deepened, Kale and Lyra walked through the castle halls together, hand in hand. Every corridor, every shadow, felt alive in a new way. Eldrath was no longer just a kingdom of stone and history. It was a living testament to the bond between Alpha, Omega, and Pack. In the private chambers of the castle, they finally allowed themselves to rest. Kale's eyes, wide open and honest, met Lyra's. "I pretended to be blind," he said quietly. "Not to deceive, but to protect, and perhaps to test if anyone could reach me." Lyra's hand touched his cheek, gentle but firm. "And you found me," she said softly. "I reached you, Kale, and you reached me too." For a long moment, they sat in silence, letting the world settle around them. Outside, the pack rested, still alert but calm, their loyalty unwavering. The shadows of Eldrath no longer felt threatening. They had been tested, faced the darkness, and emerged stronger, together. But even in that calm, the air held a faint charge, a reminder that peace was never permanent in Eldrath. Kale felt it in his bones, the whisper of challenges yet to come. Yet now, he would not face them alone. He had Lyra, strong, courageous, and fearless, and together, they were unstoppable. The first light of dawn touched the mountaintops. The northern cliffs glimmered faintly, as if acknowledging their victory. Kale stood beside Lyra on the balcony once more, looking out over their kingdom. He had finally unblinded himself, not only to the world, but to the truth of his own heart. And in that clarity, he saw not only the shadows, but the light, the life, love, and strength that Lyra had brought into his world. Lyra leaned into him, her hand in his, her eyes reflecting the first morning sun. "Whatever comes next," she said, "we face it together." "Always." Kale nodded, a rare smile breaking across his face. "Always," he repeated. And in that simple word lay the promise of love, trust, and the unbreakable bond between Alpha, Omega, and Pack. As Eldrath woke beneath the sun, the kingdom seemed renewed, yet whispers of the past lingered in the winds. The darkness had been faced, the curse challenged, and the bond proven. But the story of Kale and Lyra, and the power of their unity, was only beginning.